everybody, this is Nahaz, and men lie, women lie, but stats don't lie. Well, actually, maybe they do. We might have to retitle this series after this one. But I wanted to give you guys a video about Shanghai, what's happened so far, and a look ahead to the playoff stage, which is starting here in just a few hours. This has been a really crazy tournament, and I'm looking forward in the next couple of days to hearing people talk more about Dota and less about drama. So unfortunately, before we start, I got to own up to the fact that my compendium predictions for this tournament really were not the best. I said in a previous video, Frankfurt was one of the more predictable Dota 2 tournaments we'd seen. Shanghai has not been. There have been a ton of upsets, a ton of results that at least we didn't expect. So a number of the predictions that we gave you, which were predicated on knowing some of the teams, knowing their play styles, thinking that we were going to be able to predict how they were going to do, were a little bit off. So it's just what happens sometimes in statistics. Your predictions, well, if they were always right, they wouldn't be called predictions. We can ask Purge what he thinks about it. Yeah, that's about what I thought. All right, so group phase recap. In this slide, the teams that advanced to the upper bracket are highlighted in blue boxes. You'll note there is a little bit of an error in the compendiums. As of this morning, Team Spirit is listed as having won the series against Fnatic. It is Fnatic that advanced to the upper bracket, giving us 2 out of 2 SEA teams advancing to the upper bracket, and those are both open qualified teams. So that's a result I think not many people expected. As I was saying, at Frankfurt, 7 out of 8 directly invited teams advanced into the upper bracket after the group phase. At Shanghai, it's only 4 of 8. So this has been a much more chaotic tournament and a much more open field. The other big story, I feel, of the group stage has been the Chinese teams. Chinese teams are only 1-6 against non-Chinese opponents in these best-of-3 group phase series, and the only series that was won was against Archon by Newbie 2-0. So really, there were a lot of people going into Shanghai that were talking about the Chinese New Year, talking about the fact that that time off, that time away from practice might be affecting the Chinese teams going into this tournament. And again, that was something that we saw with DAC last year. It wasn't just Newbie last year at DAC that disappointed. A number of the Chinese teams also did not play up to par in that tournament, and so far I would argue that's something of what we're seeing in Shanghai as well. All right, so in terms of the meta, nothing too terribly unexpected here, although I do think I wondered in some previous videos how much the meta was going to stabilize by the time we went into Shanghai. I do think it's stabilized in some ways, but one of the ways that you can see that is I think a lot of teams were ready for the sort of meta heroes. Of the top 13 most picked heroes at Shanghai, only 13 heroes were picked 10 or more times, and only 4 of those heroes had winning records. Lion is kind of the notable outlier here, which was really only a few teams. EG, OG, and Secret were 7-1 combined with this hero, so it wasn't necessarily a hero that a lot of teams were picking. And surprisingly, even though Lion actually stuck around in the Eastern meta for a lot longer, it's not necessarily the Chinese teams, in fact, most of the Western teams that have been picking up that hero in this tournament. Invoker is another one. It's a bit of a surprise to me, simply because with the nerfs that came out in the latest version of the patch, I really didn't think that Invoker was going to be this prominent quite so early on in the tournament. The influences of those nerfs, however, to Deafening Blast in particular, have been felt. You can tell Exort builds are only 5 and 8 so far, whereas Quas Wex has come back a little bit, and Quas Wex builds are 4 and 2. So that Invoker nerf is mattering, just maybe not as much as I thought immediately before the tournament. Phoenix is a hero. For some reason, a lot of the Chinese teams and some Western teams have been picking up this hero. It's gained a little bit of momentum as a 4-position pick. On paper, the 4-position Phoenix looks pretty good. Sunray is really the only one of his skills, his standard 3 skills, that scales that heavily with level. The damage on Icarus Dive does scale, but you're not really using that for the damage. You're using it mostly as an escape. And Fire Spirits doesn't really scale with level that much. So on paper, that makes sense, but it hasn't necessarily met with the success that I think these teams would have liked to see. Jurax is 3 and 1 on Phoenix. Everybody else is 2 and 6 on this hero. And notably, eHome really struggled with it in game 1. Faceless Void was another hero that early on in the tournament, a lot of the Chinese teams were picking. It was looking pretty bad. All of a sudden, in the last day, Void goes 4-0 in Group D. 3 wins with Mind Control and 1 win with Universe really turned that hero around. But up until that point, Void had really been struggling. One thing I didn't get wrong is that Earth Spirit has been banned so far in 39 out of 48 drafts. The only hero that's even close to that really is Chen, and it's quite a bit far behind. So I think it's safe to say Earth Spirit is going to be your most banned hero for the tournament. And when you look at hero category leaders, again, these are subject to change. Slark with 11.8, that's mostly due to a small number of matches, obviously. Zeus, I do think, is going to hold up in terms of his assists per game lead with 15.0. Tide, which is a little bit surprising to me, Tide Hunter has come back a little bit as a pick. Secret did very well with Tide, in particular in combination with Enigma on day 1, and he only has 1.5 deaths per game, although I believe that will probably change by the time the tournament's over. So we're going to recap the 4 groups one at a time, and just to keep the time of the video manageable and so that I don't die on camera here, I'm only going to comment on a couple of the teams out of each group. And in Group A, we should note that there are only 2 teams with average match times under 30 minutes. Secret and MVP were both from this group, and we'll have more to say about MVP. Secret's a team I want to comment a little bit on eHome and why they've struggled, so I'm not going to have much to say about Secret, but Secret really did look probably a little better in this group than people thought they would going into the tournament. Secret has had some well-publicized struggles in 6.86. They went with Tide and Enigma in combination with each other in 3 out of their games. I believe they won all 3, and they really have looked quite a bit better. Wii has gone back to playing Invoker, and in spite of the nerfs, looks pretty good on that hero. I know that was an issue that I mentioned for them, so I'm guardedly optimistic about Secret's chances going into the upper bracket, although a top 4 finish still would, I think that's a little bit of a stretch for them, although definitely achievable. Okay, but obviously the big thing that we didn't predict in this group was MVP. The statistical models going into the tournament gave them a less than 10% chance of winning the group. Again, I was having a back and forth with a number of people that were doing machine learning on Twitter before the tournament began, and they were actually saying that if anything, this 8.6.2% may be a little bit high in terms of estimating their chances. Well, not only did MVP win the group, but they came out and dominated. QO, you know, I was asked before Shanghai to rank teams by a couple of different people, and the people that asked me about Phoenix, I said, look, when QO goes ham, this is a team that's very difficult to beat. They can play with anybody. When QO doesn't go ham, they really don't have very much of a backup plan. Well, at least in the 4 games that they played in this group, this kid was the lord and master of going ham. He was 37-4 and 28 combined in the 4 games that they were played. Had almost 40% of his team's kills. 13.2 kills per 35 minutes in these 4 games. That's by far number 1 of any player in the tournament, and 18.3k hero damage per 35 minute. I mean, that's just insane. No other player at Shanghai is over 14k in that category. So, I mean, and by the way, it's going to be very important because MVP Phoenix has played such short matches. You're going to hear me talk a lot of times in these slides about per 35-minute statistics. Some people have asked me about that in the past. The reason that we do that is because, at least in previous patches, the average length of a Pro Dota 2 match usually hovers somewhere right around the 35-minute mark. It's closer to 36 or 37 in this current patch, but that's fine. Those are just ways that we normalize our statistics to give us a better idea of per game stats. If you don't do that, things like kills and assist totals tend to get inflated by players that play on teams that play long matches. Okay, so we're going to see in a minute, Alliance has a lot of statistics that are very high in terms of kills and assists, but that's largely because they played in much longer games. And back to MVP, because this is really, it's kind of unprecedented. In a lot of the subsequent discussion in these slides, I'll basically be talking about records by this guy's the #1 player in this category that's not on MVP Phoenix. That's how thoroughly they dominated in these 4 games. All 5 of their players are averaging 10 or more assists per 35 minutes. That's absolutely insane. Dubu, their 5 position and captain, is 19.4 assists per 35 minutes in the 4 games. And again, it's a small sample, but that's just unprecedented in a LAN, particularly one of this caliber. They have shown a little bit of predictability in terms of their draft. They run the Nature's Prophet and Vengeful Spirit in 3 out of their 4 games. But again, their overall statistics, it's just nobody else is even close. 24 minutes average match time. That's faster than anybody else by 5 full minutes. They have 33.3 team kills per 35 minutes. That's almost like 30% more than Liquid at number 2. 8.55 team KAD, and their 3 cores all have the top 3 individual KDAs at the event. They have 3 out of the fastest tower kill times, all 3 before 5 minutes and 10 seconds. I mean, the list goes on. And again, it's going to seem to a lot of people that I'm really gushing over only 4 games, but this is a team that came into this tournament with statistically maybe the weakest profile of any team. And, you know, I talked in the preview video about QO and the fact that his career numbers at Dota 2 LAN events are just amazing. He has the #1 kills per 35 minutes at Dota 2 LAN events all time. But boy, he absolutely delivered here against top quality competition. You can't take anything away from what this team has done. eHome, again, ordinarily only talking about 2 teams out of a group, I would talk about the top 2 finishers, but I do think you gotta kind of take the bull by the horns here and ask, what is going on with eHome? This is a team that I think went into this event as the odds-on favorite and just struggled mightily on the first day of the event. The first thing that I noticed with eHome is that they picked Phoenix 4 times in 7 drafts and Warlock mid twice in their last 3 games. And this is a weird thing to me because this is the first time that they picked either of those heroes in 6.86. They had 4 Phoenix picks for whatever that's worth in the previous patch, 0 Warlock picks. So they're really going away from what's worked for them. And this is why in a number of the previous videos talking about eHome, I said, look, if they show up at Shanghai playing the same branded Dota that they played at MDL, playing at that same level, I think they're the favorites of the tournament. Well, the first thing that you notice is that they didn't show up playing in that same style. They've almost changed their style to be a little bit more like Newbie, who I did think had a chance to do well, but definitely has been less successful for them in this patch. What's really concerning to me about these games is that if you break down the numbers and look at the replays, in 5 out of the 7 games, CTY had the overall last hit lead at 8 minutes. So the laning phase for them was going really well. And in a number of cases, teams even just let CTY free farm. There was one game in particular of their last couple where basically he had a lane as Sven, and he was free farm bot lane for almost 10 full minutes. Really, and even in the games that he didn't lead, right? One of the games he was slightly behind an aggressive gyrocopter. I believe he was playing Ursa in that game, so that's totally understandable. And another of the games that he was behind, he was facing a puppy Enigma. So again, that CS is going to be inflated just in the jungle. So, you know, he's doing really well in lane. CTY and Old Chicken actually have the top single match kill totals in this group at 19 and 17 respectively, and yet they're still losing. And to me, the big reason for this, obviously it's a 5-man game. You can't ever put everything on one player. But you look at Old 11. In their 5 losses, his assist totals 0, 1, 6, 3. These are 4 of his lowest assist totals in 6.86. He's played 40 games and only 4 times has he had 0, 1, and then there are a couple more games that he's tied for 3 assists. So these are tied for his 4 lowest assist outputs in 40 games in this patch. 6.4 deaths per game that he's averaging and 4.6 assists per game are both bottom 5 among all the players that have played so far in the event. And he was hospitalized prior to the last series with an infected tooth. I have to believe that that's affected him drastically. And even though, as we talked about before, the relatively poor performance of the Chinese teams overall has sort of been a theme at Shanghai, I really do think that provided they're able to get him right, eHome still does have the potential to do fairly well in the playoff phase, but obviously they have a lot of problems to fix. Okay, Group B. I'm not going to talk about Team Spirit very much. It is worth mentioning Spirit's Iceberg is one of only 2 players that to average over 13k hero damage per 35 minutes. Of course, the other being QO. So he's played very well, and they did have a chance in that last series against Fnatic, even though the Compendium is a little bit maybe CIS fanboyism here. The Compendium has them advancing. It was actually Fnatic that advanced out of this group in addition to Alliance. Spirit played really well. Iceberg in particular is a tremendous young player. It just wasn't quite enough in that final series. You can also see just from the predictions, this was a group that although Fnatic was an underdog to advance, they're not nearly as big an underdog in this group as MVP Phoenix was in Group A. So, you know, Fnatic certainly, I want to give them their credit, but this was not as strong a group. It's not nearly as big an upset. Okay, Alliance coming into this tournament, I think everybody had Alliance as a top tier team. I had them a half rung below EG, eHome, and OG in my list of teams that were likely to win the tournament. I still think, you know, I thought that they had a very good chance to contend, but I didn't necessarily put them on that top line with the elite teams. Well, based on the way that they've played so far, they definitely belonged there. They picked 19 out of a possible 20 different heroes in their 4 games. The only duplicate was the Admiral Bulldog Beastmaster, and both of those were first phase picks. So Alliance has definitely been showing that aggressive but controlled 5-man Dota that they're very famous for, both pushing and split pushing. The kill and assist per match are a little bit misleading. They're number 1 in both of those categories. That's largely because they have 48-minute average match length. That's the most of all the teams at the tournament. More telling to me, though, is that 4.81 team KDA is number 2 behind only MVP Phoenix. So Alliance really, in addition to that variety, has shown overall dominance in their games. Drafting trends. They banned OD first phase and Brood second phase in 3 out of 4 drafts. That kind of makes sense to me given the style that they play against. They've only banned Earth Spirit once, which is a little bit surprising. They're not necessarily afraid to face Earth Spirit, and they're not necessarily afraid to pick Wisp. I actually think their way of dealing with Wisp is reminiscent of a lot of good teams. They basically say to you, if you're going to pick Wisp against us, you're going to have to pick it in the first phase when we still have plenty of time to counter it. Otherwise, we're going to ban it in the second phase, and if you let it through and we're in that second pick position where we get that first pick coming out of the second stage of bans, we'll take it ourselves, which is exactly what they did in their opening match. So I think their recipe for dealing with that hero is very good. They are notable in their lack of Earth Spirit bans. Loda himself, obviously, anytime you have a really good team, they're having a good run, their carry player is going to put up some good stats. But Loda's 9.8, 3.5, 12.8 average KDA is impressive to me because this team does not play a 4 protect 1 strategy. This team devotes a lot of time and attention to other objectives, to pushing. They're not necessarily babysitting Loda in lane. So I like the fact, despite the average match length being so long, he's leading the tournament in kills per game. His 632 GPM and 621 XPM are number 3 and number 2 out of all the players in Shanghai, respectively. He's also dealing a lot of damage to towers. Again, this is where that Alliance push strat really comes into play. Other teams that are either 5-manning in the mid game or they're farming up items and trying to get kills. Alliance is going to say, fine, we're going to get Loda farmed up, and if you want to fight into us, great, we'll beat you that way, but if you want to let us just push your buildings down, we'll beat you that way too. And I think that's been obviously very effective for them over the years. One of the things indicative of that play style as well is that 2.8 smokes used per 35 minutes. They're the only team under 3.0. So they're really not looking to get pickoffs. They're not looking to beat you with these crazy rotations. They're going to execute in their lanes, and then they're going to execute that split push game plan that won them TI3. And I think they have an excellent chance to go far in this tournament doing just that. Fnatic. This is a team, so we talked about two teams in the upper bracket from SEA. This is a very different case from MVP Phoenix because while MVP Phoenix looked extraordinarily dominant in their group going 4-0, setting basically every statistical benchmark in the tournament so far, Fnatic in my eyes really still have something to prove. They're 4-4 despite the upper bracket finish in terms of their match record. Both of the series that they lost were 2-0. Both of the ones that they won were 2-1. They played in 4 out of 8 50-plus minute matches so far at Shanghai. So only 8 games have gone to that length, and Fnatic's been in half of them. They're 1-3 in those games. One thing I like about Fnatic is that over time, if you watch this team, something that they have a real big problem with, they use a lot of smokes, they try and get a lot of kills, but as the games drag on, they have a hard time using time efficiently as a team. They're rotating or they're farming. They're generally not doing both. One of the things that I've liked from Fnatic so far in this tournament is that they're balancing those two needs a little bit better than I've seen them do in the past. They are getting 23k per gold per 35 minutes farm from lane creeps, which is actually tops of all the teams in the tournament. So despite the fact that they're rotating around and getting lots of kills as they usually are, Mushi's farming, mid one is farming, they're able to balance some of those rotations and still get that efficiency. Mushi's, in fact, Mushi's 289.4 last hits per 35 minutes is third overall at the event behind only Miracle and How. And again, those are very different play styles. So I like the way they're showing a bit more team balance here. Again, though, the concern is that they've shown variety, but not necessarily consistency. This isn't, in spite of the fact that people talk about Mushi's OD, they only really ran that one. They only ran OD twice, and I actually believe one was mid and one was safe lane. So they've shown variety, but not consistency. They have 10 different player hero combinations that were used multiple times, but of those, only Chrissy at 2-1 on Chen has a winning record. So they haven't necessarily found that magic formula that works for them. And even though they did defy expectations a little bit, and they're to be commended for making it into the upper bracket, this is still a team that has some finding itself to do if they expect to be successful in the playoff phase. All right, so Group C. Again, we'll spend most of our time here talking about OG. LGD is the one sort of favorite team that I haven't really caught up on my replay analysis for yet. And as you might be able to tell from my sound, I kind of ran out of time. I need to rest this afternoon for teaching tomorrow. And so I didn't quite get to finish looking at LGD. I can share some notes from with you for newbie. How's 307 last hits per 35 minutes is second only to Miracle, so they've been farming very well. They've been running their usual style where they use a lot of smokes, get those early pickoffs, try and make those early rotations translate into this impregnable mid-game lead, but they haven't necessarily been able to execute that strategy, mostly because they had to play 5 games against LGD. I think Newbie is the one team in the bracket you can point to and say they got a really, really bad draw with how these groups were constructed. Because if you look at it, both Newbie and LGD had to come through the Chinese qualifiers. Newbie played LGD in those qualifiers. LGD has had a ton of time to run tape and to look at tape and are very familiar with Newbie's strategies. And all of a sudden, Newbie gets knocked down to the lower bracket, playing 2 out of their 3 series, and indeed 5 out of their 7 games against LGD. And as luck would have it, Newbie then has to face CDEC, I believe, first round in the lower bracket. So it's a little bit unfortunate. I thought coming into this tournament, the reason that I had Newbie for a lot of the categories in the compendium was that I thought they would run up against some Western teams who would really be surprised by their play style. And unfortunately, the draw for Newbie just hasn't really worked out that way. It is notable if you only go back and watch one replay out of the entire group stage, make it this LGD versus OG game in the finals. OG actually probably should have won 2-0 to make it into the upper bracket. They took 2 of LGD's towers before the 9-minute mark. They led by 15K net worth at 26 minutes, and LGD were still able to come back against OG's Broodmother and win the game, which is just, it was an amazing match. And like I say, I haven't caught up with the rest of LGD's replays, but that's one that definitely all of you out there should watch. Okay. OG looked dominant, but not as dominant as I was expecting in this group phase. So Miracle obviously did 8K MMR things. All right, he's 685 GPM, which is by far number 1 at the event. He's almost 50 ahead of number 2. He's got a 7.3 KDA, which is, again, I warned you guys before, is number 1 of any player not on MVP Phoenix. 4.1k tower damage behind only Loda. Again, he is doing what he does best. He is farming up. He's getting kills in pivotal fights. He's not necessarily participating in a lot of early and mid-game engagements, which is totally fine. The thing that I question a little bit from OG, they've deliberately probably not shown much in their drafting. Okay, they've picked Batrider first phase in all 5 drafts. No Tail played it 3 times. Moon played it twice. Wisp was banned against them, of course, in all 5 drafts first phase, which is not surprising. Then you get to some of the later drafting data and you look a little bit askance. They banned Darkseer first phase in their final 3 drafts, which is pretty unusual given that Darkseer was only banned 10 times total out of all the group stages. They ran crit on Doom twice, which were the only 2 Doom picks that we've seen at Shanghai. So really, it's a little bit strange to me. And I think really opponents adjusted to it pretty well, even though OG did go 4-1 in their group stage. If you look, the kill score in their first 2 game 1s was 51-19. In the other 3 games that they played, the kill score was only 84-77 in their favor. So these were all 3. Even the second game against Archon was pretty close. I actually felt that they got outpicked in the second game that they had against Archon. There were some very, very good Elder Titan plays, but Whitebeard's Mirana was fantastic in that game. They really had a hard time dealing with it. So I think OG does have some adjustments to make going into the bracket phase. They're still looking better coming out of groups than they did in Frankfurt. And I do think, similar to Frankfurt, you're going to see them kick it into another gear. But I wouldn't necessarily say that OG has looked like an unstoppable juggernaut so far in the tournament, despite their record. All right, so last but not least, Group D. And I think a lot of people before the tournament called Group D the group of death. I would certainly concur with that, and even ex post. This was the only group in which an opening round loser, so Liquid lost their first series to Virtus Pro and then won their next 4 consecutive matches to end up in the upper bracket, and that's the only group in which the opening round loser advanced to the upper bracket. So this group, I thought, was a lot more hotly contested than any of the other 3. I think all 4 of the teams at some point looked pretty darn good in their matches, and I think all 4 of these teams are legitimate threats to win their first match in the playoff phase. So Evil Geniuses, not really much to say about them. Really, I said in one of the previews that I did for Shanghai is that EG is a team that just likes to win on resource accumulation. They like to be just flat out more efficient than you are in the first 15, 20 minutes of the game, and all of a sudden, then they execute those 20 to 25 minute fights and win off that. Well, judging by that metric, EG has definitely played that way in Shanghai. They're the number 1 team GPM, the number 1 team XPM at the event. It's not particularly close. Again, one of the things you can tell in terms of this efficiency, they average 8.3k gold out of the jungle per 35 minutes. That's almost a full K better than the next team. They're just getting more out of their side of the map. They're also the only team to average more than 2 Roshan kills per game. Controlling that Rosh pit, again, a key resource location on the map, obviously. You know, the rest of EG's stats, 4.5 smokes per 35 minutes, number 2. They have the most active wards average, tied with Cull. again, it's just kind of textbook Dota. And I think it was a little bit surprising to me. People have been critical in the past, questioning the size of Sumail's hero pool. He did play 5 different heroes out of 5 games, which is a little bit surprising. What's not surprising is that, as usual, Sumail just exerted an amazing amount of control over the middle part of the map. He averaged 11 runes per 35 minutes, and that's behind only Kyo at the tournament, which is in a huge margin ahead of third place S4. And when you look at it, yeah, he's doing this even in games with, say, an Enigma running around in the jungle. So it's not, maybe when you have a support Witch Doctor Mirana duo roaming around, that degree of control over the middle part of the map is less surprising. But the fact that he's able to do it with this Enigma, with Nature's Prophet and Beastmaster playing on his side, is a lot more surprising. He's just using his time very, very efficiently, pushing and counter pushing the waves in the mid lane to be able to get to those runes. It a little bit interesting to me. All 3 times that they had a chance to do it, Evil Geniuses picked Nature's Prophet in the first phase, which is interesting. Actually, no. What I meant to say, the correct stat is all 3 times they picked Nature's Prophet, it was in the first stage, which is a little bit strange to me. More and more teams, it feels like to me, are playing with Nature's Prophet as a 1-3 swing hero. So it'll still typically be in the off lane, sometimes occasionally at that 4 position, but also every once in a while at the 1 position. So you've seen Artur on that in the recent past in Captain's Draft. You saw Matumbaman on it in the group phases in Liquid's final game as well. So Nature's Prophet is gaining traction again as a first phase pick, largely because of his flexibility. And there are a lot of people out there that are saying jungle Nature's Prophet might actually be viable as sort of a wild card pick again in the pro scene as well. All right, so Liquid, final team that we'll talk about, and Liquid looked about like you would expect after they sort of got that warm-up series out of the way. They had a very tightly contested series against VP, ended up dropping that series behind a Game 3 draft that was pretty highly questionable, and then went ahead and swept the remaining 4 matches, ending up in the upper bracket. They had a 4.33 team KAD. That's number 3 overall behind MVP Phoenix and Alliance. Matumbaman had the number 2 overall GPM behind only Miracle, and 8.8 kills per 35 minutes, again behind only QO. Jerax's 12.9 assists per 35 minutes is number 1, again, out of anybody not on MVP Phoenix. He just barely edges out Crit, who is at 12.8 in that category. In terms of their drafting style, not really much of a surprise here. They banned Earth Spirit first phase in 4 out of 4 drafts where they were second pick. Pretty textbook. They're going to ban Wisp first phase in the last 5 drafts after they gave it to VP. Curious to me, and this is why I say that Game 3 draft against First Pro was really a little bit of a mulligan on their part to me. They used exactly the same opening for 2 bans and 2 picks in that 4th game that they played against, I believe that would have been Complexity, that they used in the Game 3 loss to VP. So they went ahead and they opened Beastmaster and Enchantress, but where in against that 3rd game against VP, they followed it up with the Ursa last pick, shoving PL into that mid position, which was really, really awkward in that match. They then followed it up with a much stronger set of complementary picks in the Lion, Death Prophet, and then, of course, Matumbaman's near signature Anti-Mage. I think that just it's much more in their comfort zone. They last picked Matumbaman's hero in 5 out of the final 6 drafts, so I think that's a big asset for them, that they're able. Matumbaman has a big enough hero pool, and between them, they have enough heroes that you have to ban, that they're able to leave Matumbaman's hero for very late in the draft. They generally do take Fata's hero pretty early. Their open is generally Fata's hero and a support, although sometimes it's a support and an offlaner. And they picked Void first overall all 3 times they were first picked, so that's worth noting. I really believe that going further into this tournament, the key to their success is mind control. He had 3 pretty good games on Faceless Void, although they did drop the first one. He really has, I won't say taken a step backward, but he's looked a little bit less consistent over the last couple of months than he did in the early days of this patch when Liquid were really, really kicking butt. I think to be a top 4 team at this event, Liquid needs that mind control back that they had at the defense, for example. They need him to play extraordinarily well. I think they're assigning a lot of priority to their offlane picks because of that. They understand the importance of maybe getting his hero pick in early ahead of even Fata, who's traditionally been somebody that they favor in the first phase as well. Okay, so in terms of the playoff bracket, here's why, guys, I am so excited for this tournament. Every single one of these 8 series has a great storyline behind it. I think when you look at the upper bracket, you can start with the rematch of the Frankfurt Grand Final. OG and Team Secret are facing each other in the very first match here. These are the same rosters, the same players in a new meta. What a difference a couple months can make, but I still think this could be one of the best series of the tournament. You have what I call the direct versus qualifier series. There was a lot of controversy when the direct invites to Shanghai were announced over whether Alliance or Liquid should have gotten that last bid out of the EU. I personally had Liquid rated just a little bit ahead of Alliance at that point, although Alliance has certainly validated our confidence after that by winning Starladder 13. Well, guess what, guys? This is the series where you're going to see that settled. These 2 teams faced each other in an absolute barn burner of a series at Starladder 13 in the playoff bracket, which was single elimination. That was one of the best series, if not the best series of Dota 2 that I have seen so far in 2016. And again, you're getting a rematch of that series in the very first round of the Shanghai playoff bracket. And then the other 2, we're going to see whether these SEA upstart teams are legit. They've got arguably the Giants of the West and the Giants of the East. Now that eHome has bowed down a little bit out of that role, hopefully temporarily for my compendium predictions, but I think LGD has been the best Chinese team so far in this tournament, easily. EG has maybe been the best team overall in this tournament if you toss out the fact that MVP, who knows what to make of those numbers. We're going to see whether these SEA teams are legit, and we're going to see that very, very quickly. I do think MVP could upset LGD if some of the Chinese results so far in this tournament go to form. That's why I say, unfortunately, I got to go take a nap after this, and I didn't get quite enough time to analyze LGD because on paper, LGD obviously would be favored in that series. But boy, if MVP continues to play like they've been playing, that's going to be really, really tough. Fnatic, I don't think have much of a shot against Evil Geniuses. So here are my picks for the first round. Really, the top 2 series are the ones I expect to be most hotly contested. I do think Team Liquid has a real shot of upsetting Alliance, but I've got to go with the numbers there. I think likewise, MVP Phoenix has a real shot against LGD, but I'm going to stay with the safe pick. I think OG and EG will win their 2 series fairly easily. I do like some of the new directions in terms of their draft that Secret showed in the group phase, but I don't necessarily know that they're going to have had enough reps to get consistent with those new lineups that they're running. Don't get me wrong. I think their whole new team fight centric kinds of lineups with the Tidehunter and Enigma could do really well against OG's style. So I'm not saying I expect Secret to be an easy out, but I still think OG is going to find enough form to win that series. In the lower bracket, eHome, despite struggling mightily, we've talked about that, they got probably the best draft that you could ask for out of the lower bracket. It's very possible that they could make the final 8. They could make top 8 with Liquid being the best team that they have to play, which is pretty fortunate given the strength of some of the teams in this tournament. So I do think eHome still have a run in them if 11 is right. But again, much like we said with Liquid in Mind Control, I think eHome is going to rise or fall with 11. If he's back to his MDL form, I think that this team can still contend, even coming out of the lower bracket. Remember, our last champion in Frankfurt, OG, was in the lower bracket at this point in that tournament, but they have a very big climb ahead of them, obviously. I think you talk about VP and VG. That's my best match, really, maybe even of all 8, but certainly of the lower bracket 4. Virtus Pro and Vici Gaming have both finished in the top 8 at 2 consecutive Valve events, both at TI5 and at Frankfurt. Remember, VP were the team that knocked the old Team Secret out of TI5. So this series, to me, you're talking about 2 storied teams, incredibly accomplished rosters in a best-of-1 elimination match. You're talking about B-God burning the king of the carry against Silent at the carry position, who's the overall most winning player in the history of Dota 2. One game winner take all. Unbelievable. You have, of course, when you talk about CDEC and Newbie, you're going to talk about the TI4 champs versus the TI5 runners up. It's a little bit unfortunate to me, again, if Newbie bow out of this tournament, they will have lost 5 games to Chinese teams that know them really well. So I think, to me, they're the ones that kind of get to say, maybe we had the draw going against us here. But I actually do still think they're going to pull that out against CDEC. I really do kind of like the Team Spirit against Complexity matchup, just because I think it's such an extreme matchup of styles. Team Spirit, as we remarked briefly earlier on, really plays one-man Dota. I mean, that team, Ramsey's their carry position player, can have some games where he snowballs, but in most of their matches, Team Spirit is really Iceberg and 4 other guys. And they are going to be really, really challenged, with that style against Complexity, who runs a very strong 5-manning push-type lineups, but they're just also much more efficient as a team. So I like Cole's chances in that match, but I think the contrast in styles is going to be really entertaining. And then again, like we talked about, does eHome have what it takes to regain their composure and come out of the upper bracket? Huge storylines, huge games. And so, guys, I really hope that a week from now, we're going to be, after we've crowned a champion in Shanghai, I hope that we're talking more about Dota and less about drama. These are great teams and great players. They're going to be putting it all on the lines. Let's watch some great Dota. I will talk to you guys again soon.